Well, welcome back, class. This is the last lesson from topic 16. With that in mind, today we will be discussing Lincoln's second inaugural address and the end of the war. So, let's get started. On March 4th, 1865, as the Civil War was coming to an end, Abraham Lincoln stood before a crowd on a rainy day in Washington, D.C. to deliver his second inaugural address. Unlike his first inaugural address, which was focused on trying to hold the Union together, this speech reflected on the past 4 years of war and looked ahead to the challenge of rebuilding the country. Lincoln didn't spend much time celebrating a Union victory. Instead, he spoke about the causes of the war, the deep suffering it had caused, and most importantly, what happened or what needed to happen next. He understood that the war had divided the country in ways that would not easily heal. So instead of using the speech to boast or place blame, he made a plea for unity and reconciliation. His most famous words from his speech are, "With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds." What does that mean? Well, Lincoln was saying that after so much bloodshed, the country needed to move forward with kindness and fairness, not hatred and revenge. He was making it clear that how the Union treated the defeated South would determine whether the war had been truly worth it. If the North acted with cruelty, then the war would have solved nothing. Frederick Douglass, a former enslaved man and a powerful voice for abolition, was in the audience that day. He later said that the speech was "wonderfully quiet, earnest, and solemn." Unlike most political speeches, there wasn't much applause until the very end when the crowd erupted in cheers. Lincoln simply bowed in appreciation. He had only spoken for about 6 to 7 minutes, but those few minutes carried a message that would define the future of the country. The war wasn't quite over when Lincoln gave that speech, but it was close. For months, Union General Ulysses S. Grant had been pushing to capture Richmond, Virginia, which was the capital of the Confederacy. From May 1864 through early 1865, Grant and Confederate General Robert E. Lee fought brutal battles. Some, like the Wilderness, Spotsylvania, and Cold Harbor, left tens of thousands of men dead or wounded in just a matter of weeks. The North was horrified by the losses, but Grant refused to back down. He knew the Union could replace soldiers and supplies, but the South could not. By April 2nd, 1865, Grant's army finally broke through Lee's defenses at Petersburg, forcing Lee to abandon Richmond. The Confederate government fled the city, and by the next day, Union troops had taken control. President Lincoln visited Richmond shortly after, walking through its streets as newly freed African Americans gathered around him in celebration. Lee's army, now exhausted and outnumbered, retreated westward but didn't get far. A week later, on April 9th, 1865, they found themselves surrounded at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia. Lee knew that if he kept fighting, his men would be slaughtered. So he made the difficult decision to surrender to Grant. The terms of surrender were surprisingly generous. Confederate soldiers had to give up their weapons, but officers were allowed to keep their sidearms, and men who had horses could take them home, since Grant knew they needed them for farming. Most importantly, Grant promised that no Confederate soldier would be punished or imprisoned as long as they laid down their arms and went home. This decision helped prevent further bloodshed and laid the foundation for rebuilding the country. The Civil War was the deadliest conflict in American history. More than 360,000 Union soldiers and about 250,000 Confederate soldiers lost their lives. The financial cost of the war was massive, around $20 billion, which was more than 11 times what the federal government had spent in total since the country was founded in 1789. But beyond the numbers, the war permanently changed America. Before the war, people often referred to the country as "these United States," emphasizing individual states' rights. After the war, it became the United States, a single unified nation. The war also ended slavery, shifting the balance of power in the country. The Republican Party, which had been formed in the 1850s to oppose the expansion of slavery, now had control, while the Democratic Party, which had been divided over the war, lost much of its influence. The war left deep scars, but it also forced the nation to confront issues that had been ignored for too long. Lincoln's assassination just days after the war ended meant he wouldn't be the one to guide the country through Reconstruction, but his words lived on. His vision of a nation rebuilt with malice toward none and charity toward all or for all would shape the years to come. Well, with the end of the war, we also come to the end of topic 16. When we next meet again, we'll be diving into topic 17, which covers Reconstruction, and that is what happens after the war and how the nation worked to rebuild. Well, that's all for this evening, or this morning, or the day, depending on what time you're watching this. But remember, the past shaped today, but you shape tomorrow. Make it count. Take care. See you next time. Bye bye.